At 8:16 in the evening, in the living room of my mother's house in Portland, Oregon, I watched my husband place his hand on her shoulder the way a man places his hand on the woman of his life. Not the polite touch of a son-in-law greeting his mother-in-law, not a gesture of comfort at a family birthday dinner, but possession. On the dining table, Jacob's birthday cake sat untouched, a candle shaped like the number 3 leaning crookedly in the white frosting. My little brother sat in his high chair, both small hands sticky with icing, his clear blue eyes scanning the room without understanding why the adults had suddenly gone silent. He had just turned 3, too young to know that his own birthday had become the night I lost my husband, my mother, and my childhood all at once. My mother, Evelyn Carter, stood beside Michael, her face pale but unrepentant. She wore the silk cream dress I had bought her with my first paycheck in Denver. Around her neck was my father's pearl necklace, the one she had once said she would keep until the day she closed her eyes. Michael placed a cream-colored envelope on the dining table. Its edge touched a trail of wax dripping down into the white frosting. 4 words printed in cold capital letters appeared under the yellow light. DNA Paternity Report. I looked down at the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.9997%. Alleged father, Michael Bennett. Child, Jacob Carter. For 7 seconds, I lost the ability to read English. Every word dissolved into small black marks on white paper. Then Michael looked at me, calm to the point of revulsion, and said, "Claire, you have to understand. This isn't as simple as you think." He paused for exactly 4 seconds, as though choosing the cleanest spot to drive the knife. "Jacob is my son." The air in the room froze solid. I heard the dishwasher running in the kitchen, the clock ticking on the wall, and the sound of Jacob's plastic spoon hitting the floor. The boy startled, his lip trembled. Then he turned to look at my mother, waiting for her to comfort him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply looked down at my father's old brown leather shoes, the ones I was wearing, the ones he had left behind before he passed, the ones I had kept for 11 years, because he once told me, "When you don't know where to stand, stand on whatever reminds you of who you are." The anger came, but it wasn't hot. It didn't choke my throat, didn't make my hands shake, didn't push me into a cheap breakdown that would give them reason to call me unstable. It was ice cold, precisely the temperature of a decision that has just been made. Michael stepped half a step closer. "I was going to tell you when Jacob was older. I just didn't want to destroy this family over something no one can change anymore." I looked at him. The man who had knelt to propose to me at the Seattle waterfront at 9:42 at night. The man who had held my hand in the hospital through my first miscarriage. The man who had just called impregnating his wife's mother in secret something no one can change. My mother let out a small laugh, barely audible, but enough to slice through my throat like wire. She walked toward Jacob, wiping a smear of icing from his cheek with her thumb, tender enough to make me sick. The boy clutched his green stuffed dinosaur to his chest, unaware that he was the living evidence of a filthy betrayal. "Claire," she said, her voice softening into the tone she always used when she wanted to cast herself as the wounded one. "Don't make a scene. You've always been so dramatic. This is an adult matter." I looked at her. The woman who had given birth to me. The woman who had held me when my father died. The woman who had sat in the front row at my wedding, wearing a pale blue dress, crying as if she were genuinely happy for her daughter. Then she said the words that froze everything inside me completely. "At least Michael gave me a real son. As for you, you couldn't even hold on to a child of your own." No one breathed. Jacob blinked, then burst into tears because he didn't understand why the room had suddenly become frightening. His crying was small, fragile, broken, like an innocent soul thrown into the middle of adult sin. I looked at him, and the only soft part left in me ached until it nearly shattered. Michael turned to look at Evelyn, for the first time that evening, and a flicker of fear crossed his face. Perhaps he knew that line had gone too far. Perhaps he knew she had just done what every foolish manipulator does in the final moment, spoken the naked truth when they thought they had already won. Slowly, I removed my wedding ring. I didn't throw it, didn't slam it on the table. I placed it beside the uncut birthday cake, just beneath the number 3 candle, melting wax into the white frosting. Michael lowered his voice. "Claire, don't do anything stupid." I smiled, very faintly enough that perhaps only I could feel my own face move. "No," I said. "From now on, I will do everything very intelligently." My mother tilted her head and looked at me, her eyes dry and cold as glass. "What do you think you're going to do? You have nothing. The house you live in is paid for by Michael. The joint account is his money. The law firm he uses is better than anything you could ever afford." She was wrong on all 3 counts. But I didn't need to correct her just then. I only bent down, straightened the laces on my father's old brown shoes, then stood up straight. In the 31st second of silence, I looked at each person in that room in turn, the unfaithful husband, the unfaithful mother, and the 3-year-old boy I had just discovered was actually the secret child of my husband and my own mother. Then I picked up my purse from the chair and walked out of the house where my childhood had just been buried alive. I left with empty hands, a ring left behind on the table, and my father's old shoes striking dry, deliberate steps on the front porch. But in my phone was a folder they had never known existed. But let me go back to the beginning, because the story didn't start here. 3 years before that evening, at 10:38 at night, my mother called me from Portland. Her voice was weak, dry, as though she had just swallowed something sharp. "Claire," she said, "I think I'm pregnant." I stood frozen in the hallway of my Denver apartment for exactly 19 seconds. I was 32 at the time, married to Michael for nearly 4 years, and my mother was 54. I asked who the father was, and the other end of the line went so silent I could clearly hear the hum of my own refrigerator in the dark. She didn't answer. She only cried. Not the kind of crying that breaks apart, but controlled crying, just enough to make me feel cruel if I asked one more question. I drove from Denver to Portland in 18 hours and 40 minutes, stopping only 3 times for gas and black coffee. When I arrived at 5:22 in the afternoon, my mother was sitting on the sofa, hands on her stomach, while Michael, my husband, was standing in her kitchen, washing glasses as though he belonged there. At the time, I was naive enough to call it kindness. Michael said my mother had called him first because she didn't want to alarm me. He said everything in a voice so slow, soft, and reasonable that a lie told with enough calm can make the truth look like paranoia. My mother squeezed my hand and cried, saying, "I've already lost your father, Claire. Do you really want me to lose this baby too, because of your suspicion?" I went silent, and I believed her. She said the father was Robert Miller, an old friend she had run into at a fundraiser in Seattle at 9:15 in the evening. She said he wanted nothing to do with it. Over the first 3 months, I transferred a total of $6,800 to cover prenatal visits, vitamins, baby supplies, and medical bills she said insurance wouldn't cover. Michael was even the one who suggested we help more. He said, "She only has herself. You're her only daughter." Looking back now, that was how he used my sense of filial devotion to fund the consequences of his own crime. Jacob was born at 2:41 in the morning, weighing 7 pounds, 2 ounces. I stood outside the delivery room, holding my mother's coat, wearing my father's old brown leather shoes because it was raining hard that night. Michael arrived 23 minutes late, his shirt wrinkled, his hair wet, his eyes red. And when the nurse brought Jacob out, he stared at the baby far longer than any ordinary man should stare at his mother-in-law's child. I noticed. But I strangled my own suspicion. Over the next 3 years, small details began lining up, like needles hidden beneath a carpet. Michael remembered Jacob's vaccination schedule more accurately than I did. He knew which formula made the boy gassy, knew which songs helped him sleep, and was present for 9 out of 11 pediatric appointments, yet missed 4 of our couples counseling sessions. My mother changed too. She stopped referring to Jacob as your little brother when she spoke to me. She called him mother's boy in a voice so tender it was almost possessive. Once, while I was changing Jacob's shirt after he spilled orange juice on himself, my mother stood behind me and said, You're so good with children. If only you could have kept your own. I had miscarried twice. That sentence didn't make me scream. It made me go silent. The silence of someone who has just understood that some wounds aren't touched by accident. They are pressed deliberately by someone else's deliberate finger. I began documenting everything at 11:47 in the morning after a brunch at the Pine and Ash restaurant. That day, Michael paid $84.60 for my mother's meal using his company card, then told me it was client entertainment. On the drive home, his phone lit up with a message from Evelyn. "He has your eyes today." I didn't confront him. I didn't grab his phone. I simply took a screenshot while he was in the restroom for exactly 2 minutes and 12 seconds. That was the first photo in the folder. I named the folder Blue Shoes, using a photo of my father's old shoes on the bathroom tile as its icon. Not out of sentimentality, but because every time I opened it, I needed to remember that I was not allowed to waver. Over the next 14 months, I collected 486 screenshots, 73 receipts, 29 bank statements, 11 misdirected forwarded emails, 6 legally obtained audio recordings made inside my own home, and 1 video file, 3 minutes and 18 seconds long, from the doorbell camera. Every piece of evidence was named by time, location, and the dollar amount involved. There was no emotion in the way I stored them, only data. Column A, time. Column B, behavior. Column C, evidence. Column D, financial damage. Column E contained a single word, motive. The first amount I discovered was $12,400. Michael had transferred it to my mother across 5 small transactions, each under $3,000, spaced exactly 9 days apart. Then came $38,000 labeled as loan repayment, then $71,250 pulled from our joint investment account and routed into an Oregon LLC named Carter Family Holdings. By month 14, the total had reached exactly $152,400. Worse still, $25,000 of that had been deposited into an education savings account in Jacob's name. On paper, Michael listed it as family support. In my spreadsheet, I wrote exactly 5 words: child support hidden as charity. I remember sitting in my car at 12:06 in the morning, outside the suburban house where Michael claimed he was meeting a client. The light in the upstairs bedroom of my mother's house was on. Michael's car was parked 3 houses down, tucked under a large maple tree, but the license plate was still clearly visible in my dashcam footage. I didn't get out. I didn't knock on the door. I sat still, both hands on the steering wheel, my father's shoes resting lightly on the floor mat, watching the clock move from 12:06 to 12:47. That was the first time I broke down alone. No one saw me cry. No one heard me sob in that dark car, where the windshield fogged over from my ragged, broken breathing. I bit down on the back of my hand until it bled, to stop myself from calling Michael, calling my mother, begging for an explanation I knew would only become another trap. After 41 minutes, I wiped my face with my jacket sleeve, opened my phone, and added a new line to the spreadsheet. 12:47 a.m. Michael's car outside Evelyn's house. Subject stayed inside. Evidence pending. From that moment on, I stopped waiting for them to confess. I began waiting for exactly the right moment, when they would no longer be able to deny it. And when I sent those 486 photos, 73 receipts, and 29 bank statements to a woman named Patricia Hale, she replied with exactly 6 words. Don't confront them. Come alone. I met Patricia Hale at 7:30 in the morning in a small downtown Denver office, 12th floor, where the glass was so clean it looked like there was no way back. Patricia was 58 years old, with 27 years of experience in high-asset divorce and marital fraud, silver hair cut to her jaw, low voice, eyes calm to the point of coldness. She didn't ask if I was okay, because people like her understand that sometimes a kind question is enough to make a victim fall apart. She opened her laptop and reviewed the Blue Shoes folder for 22 minutes without a word. I sat across from her, both hands under the table, fingernails pressed into my palms hard enough to hurt. When she reached the $71,250 transfer into Carter Family Holdings, she said only this: "He didn't just betray you. He has been moving assets before you had a chance to understand what was happening." That sentence chilled me far deeper than any affair, because love can die in a single night. But when a man has already begun transferring money, forming companies, hiding accounts, it means in his mind, your life had already been broken into line items long ago. Patricia brought in 2 more people. Daniel Cross, a forensic accountant with 19 years of experience who had traced assets across 43 divorce cases involving shell companies. And Nora Whitman, a private investigator with 16 years of experience, a former insurance fraud investigator, a woman in a gray jacket whose eyes held the unshakable calm of someone who had seen too many rotting versions of human beings. Daniel asked me only 3 questions. How many accounts does Michael have? Who has access to the joint investment account? And what time did he last say IVF was too expensive? When I answered the last one, 3:25 in the afternoon at the Denver clinic, he wrote it down without blinking. Nora didn't promise to catch anyone in the act. She simply placed a small recorder on the table and said, "I will document what they do when they think no one is watching." Patricia handed me a pale yellow sheet of paper with 5 lines on it. No confrontation. Don't leave the shared home. Don't sign any documents. Don't transfer any more money to Evelyn. Don't let Michael know that I already knew far more than what he had admitted. I read those 5 lines 3 times. Then Patricia looked directly at me. "Claire, from this moment on, you cannot act like a betrayed wife. You must act like a plaintiff who is preparing to win." I returned home at 9:18 that evening. Michael sat in the living room, laptop open, glass of wine to his right, phone face down on the table. He looked up and asked, "Where have you been all day?" I said, "Walking. I needed to clear my head." He glanced down at my father's old brown shoes and smirked. "You're still wearing those? Claire, sometimes I look at you clinging to old things and wonder why your life never gets better." I wanted to pick up his wine glass and smash it into his face, but I only took off my jacket, hung it on the chair, and asked him if he wanted some soup from the refrigerator. Patricia had told me, a person about to win does not announce it in advance. For the next 6 weeks, I lived beside Michael the way you live beside a snake that has slept under your pillow for years. I made his coffee at 7:05 every morning, folded his dress shirts at 10:20 every night, sat across from him through silent dinners. He talked about work, clients, financial pressures, while Daniel was tracing, thread by thread, every dollar he had hidden behind my back. Michael wasn't foolish. He began to sense that something had shifted. One evening at 8:44, he stood behind me in the kitchen and asked, "Are you angry at me?" I was washing a white plate. Hot water ran over my hands, the sound of the faucet covering the heartbeat in my throat. I said, "I'm just tired." He put his hand on my waist. That touch had once made me feel safe. Now it felt like a forged signature on a poisoned contract. "Don't let your mother make you overthink things," he said. "Evelyn is very fragile." I nearly laughed. Evelyn is fragile. The 54-year-old woman who had borne a child with her daughter's husband, who had let her daughter pay for her prenatal care, who had used my miscarriages as a blade to turn against me, now described as fragile. I understood immediately. Michael wasn't just protecting her. He was still choosing her. 3 days later, Michael tested me. He deliberately left his phone face up on the kitchen counter at 6:32 in the evening. The screen paused on a message thread with Evelyn. I saw her name, saw the first 4 words. She knows nothing. Then he turned back too quickly, as though he had been waiting for me to flinch. I didn't flinch. I didn't look a second time. I only set the salad plate down on the table and asked, "Do you want extra pepper?" His eyes rested on my face for 5 seconds. Then he smiled. The smile of a man who believes his wife is too weak to be a threat. Nora sent her first report at 11:12 that night. 9 pages, PDF format, with 14 photographs attached. Michael had appeared at Evelyn's house 5 times over 12 days. 3 times he parked several houses away. Once he stayed for 2 hours and 36 minutes. Once he carried Jacob into the backyard at 6:18 in the evening. In the last photograph, Evelyn stood beside Michael, her hand resting on his back, while Jacob clung to his neck the way a child clings to his father. I looked at that photograph for a long time, not because I still loved Michael, but because I had once believed I was his family. Daniel called me at 6:50 the following morning. His voice was dry, even, with no drama. I found another $43,800. It moved through a fake furniture supplier, then back into the LLC. I asked, "What's the total?" He answered after 2 seconds. Including the new amount, $196,200. There may be more. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter. In front of me were 2 slices of toast, one corner burnt, a faint smell of char drifting through the air. I remembered Michael once saying we couldn't try IVF again because the finances aren't stable. I had believed him. I had sat in that clinic at 3:25 in the afternoon, hands resting on my flat stomach, listening to the doctor discuss costs and success rates, while my husband was wiring money to his secret child with my mother. There are truths that don't just break your heart. They make you despise the version of yourself that ever believed. That night, I locked the bathroom door at 1:09 in the morning, turned the shower on full blast, and sank to the cold tile floor. I pressed a towel into my mouth so the sound of my crying wouldn't escape. I wasn't crying over losing Michael anymore. I was crying because I had realized I had been used as a convenient woman to sign paperwork, pay bills, provide care, stay silent, and be grateful for scraps of counterfeit love. After 17 minutes, I stood up. I washed my face, combed my hair back into place, put on my father's brown leather shoes even though I was still inside. Then I opened Blue Shoes, added Nora's report, Daniel's notes, and an audio file of Michael speaking at 10:03 that night. "You should apologize to your mother. She doesn't deserve your suspicion." Patricia listened to that recording the next morning. She didn't curse, didn't sigh, didn't pity me. She simply drew a line in red pen and said, "Good, this is gaslighting with a repeated pattern." Repeated pattern. Those 2 words steadied me. Because when pain is called by its right name, it stops being a private madness inside your own head. It becomes evidence. 2 weeks later, Patricia filed a motion to preserve marital assets. Daniel submitted a preliminary report on the money trail. Nora continued tracking Michael and Evelyn's movements. Patricia placed a blue folder in front of me. On the cover, Bennett versus Bennett, Asset Preservation. Below that, she had written in black ink, "Do not interrupt your enemy while they are choosing the stage." I asked, "Which stage?" Patricia capped her pen and looked at me over her thin frames. "People like them are always most confident right before they destroy themselves. We don't pull them down. We let them step up on their own." And exactly 9 days later, Michael chose that stage for me. A room with 64 people, 12 bottles of champagne, and a screen large enough to burn his entire life to ash. The room was on the top floor of the Alder and Finch Hotel in Portland. The fundraiser began at 7 o'clock in the evening, benefiting a children's education fund for which my mother had just been invited to serve as community ambassador. I know that sounds darkly comic, but people who perform virtue are always drawn to things that appear clean. Michael told me I had to attend, saying this was an opportunity for people to see that our family is still fine. At 6:12 that evening, I stood in front of the mirror in a simple black dress, my father's old brown shoes still on my feet. Michael looked down at them and let out a small laugh. "You're really going to wear those to an event?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Don't blame me if your mother finds it embarrassing." I looked at him through the mirror and said, "She has done things far more embarrassing than my shoes." Michael's smile vanished in under a second. He placed his hand on my back like a devoted husband and said, "Don't cause a scene tonight. Evelyn has been through enough." I didn't respond. I only picked up my purse. Inside, my phone, my car keys, and a silver USB drive Patricia had given me at 4:20 that afternoon. Patricia had said, "Only use it if they back you into a corner." I asked, "What if they don't?" She looked at me for a long time, then answered, "They will." At 7:18 in the evening, Michael and I walked into the banquet hall. 64 people were there, 12 bottles of champagne on the bar, and a large LED screen behind the podium. Evelyn stood near the stage in a deep blue dress, my father's pearl necklace around her throat. In her arms was Jacob, 3 years old, dressed in a small gray suit, holding a red toy car. The boy smiled at me, as though he had no idea he was at the center of a filthy secret. I smiled back and reminded myself 7 times, this is not Jacob's fault. Evelyn stepped toward me. Her eyes dropped to my shoes. Then she said quietly, "You always know how to make yourself look pitiful." I replied, "And you always know how to make yourself look respectable." Her eyes darkened, but in front of 64 people, Evelyn Carter never let her mask slip for long. For the first 47 minutes, I only observed. Michael shook hands, smiled, performed the role of devoted son-in-law to perfection. Evelyn held Jacob like a living symbol of latent life sacrifice, telling everyone around her that having a child at this age was, quote, a miracle. At 8:04, Evelyn stepped up to the podium. The screen behind her switched to a photograph of Jacob laughing in the park, and the room applauded. I heard that applause and felt nauseated. She spoke about loss, age, and the courage to become a mother again. Then she looked in my direction and smiled gently. "I want to thank my daughter, Claire, because even though there are painful misunderstandings between us, I still believe she will learn that family love doesn't always follow the path we choose." Several people turned to look at me. Evelyn continued, "There are people who, when they hurt, choose suspicion. There are people who, when they can't have what they want, choose to wound others. But as a mother, I choose forgiveness." I understood immediately what she was doing. She was framing me as a jealous, unstable, bitter woman, consumed by grief over not having children. Michael stepped closer to me and bent down to murmur, "Don't react. You'll only make yourself look worse." I didn't reply. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping low as a knife laid under silk. "If you go up there, I will tell everyone you're not mentally well, and they will believe me." That was the moment I understood they weren't just trying to hide the truth. They wanted to bury me beneath a fabricated version of the story. On the podium, Evelyn dabbed at the corner of her eye with a white tissue. "Tonight, I pray that my daughter finds peace," she said, "because sometimes pain can turn a good person into someone very difficult to recognize." The room went silent for 3 seconds. Then came the sound of applause. Michael placed his hand on my shoulder, this time without gentleness. "Come outside with me," he said through his teeth. I looked at his hand, then at the LED screen behind Evelyn, then down at my purse. The silver USB lay still inside, like a round, not yet chambered. I said no. Then I set my glass of water on the table and walked toward the stage. The small sound of glass meeting wood was barely audible, but in my mind, it rang like a safety being clicked off. Evelyn was still smiling like a saintly mother. Perhaps she assumed I was about to apologize before 64 witnesses. I accepted the microphone from the event host, hands steady, and looked directly at her. "Mother is right," I said. "Family love doesn't always follow the path we choose." The room went quiet. I learned that too. At 10:38 at night, when she called to tell me she was pregnant, at 2:41 in the morning, when Jacob was born, and at 11:47 in the morning, when I saw the message she sent to my husband. A murmur rippled through the room. Michael said loudly, "Claire, that's enough." I didn't look at him. I took the silver USB from my purse and set it on the podium. "No," I said. "Now it's enough." The LED screen behind me went dark for 2 seconds. Then the first folder appeared. Blue shoes, timeline of disclosure. The room fell still as a screenshot of a text message appeared. "He has your eyes today." Beneath it, the timestamp, 11:47 a.m. Then came the $12,400 bank statement. Then $38,000. Then the $71,250 transferred to Carter Family Holdings. The summary line appeared. $196,200 in concealed marital asset movement. Michael said nothing more. Neither did Evelyn. The room was so silent I could hear the candles burning. Not voices, not glasses, not background music, only the sound of soft wax collapsing steadily into a small, merciless flame. I clicked to the final file. The DNA report filled the large screen, clearly enough that even those at the back table could read it. Probability of paternity, 99.9997%. Alleged father, Michael Bennett. Child, Jacob Carter. No one applauded. Then at table number 3, the first person to stand was not me. Not Michael, not Evelyn. It was Michael's mother. Margaret Bennett rose from table number 3 very slowly. She was 68 years old, silver hair pinned neatly, her glass of champagne still undrunk. The entire room looked toward her, but she looked only at Michael. Michael spoke first. "Mom, don't." His voice was no longer steady. It was dry, low, and fractured at the end. Margaret walked toward the stage, one step at a time. She didn't look at me, didn't look at Evelyn, only at her only son, as though seeing his true face clearly for the very first time. When she was roughly 6 feet from Michael, she stopped and asked, "You let your wife pay for your secret son?" No one breathed. Michael shook his head, but that gesture carried no power left. "You don't understand," he said, then turned to face the crowd. "Claire is distorting everything. She hasn't been well since the second miscarriage." I stood still beside the podium. That line should have wounded me. But when a snake has bitten you too many times, by the last bite, you only see its venom. You no longer fear its mouth. Patricia stepped up beside me and placed the blue folder on the podium. On the cover, Bennett versus Bennett, Asset Preservation and Fraud Review. She said evenly, "I advise Mr. Bennett to stop speaking before he creates additional evidence." Michael let out a single short laugh, hollow, empty. "This is a sick act of revenge." But his left hand was trembling. Not much, just enough for the champagne in his glass to form a small, trembling ring. Evelyn stepped down from the stage, still trying to hold Jacob in front of her like a living shield. Her face had gone so white her foundation couldn't cover it. The arrogance evaporated from her in layers, the way steam peels from cold glass. "Claire," she said, her voice going soft again. That voice she had always used to make me feel like a disloyal daughter. "You didn't have to do this in front of everyone." She glanced at Jacob, as though the boy could still serve as her final reason to silence me. I lowered the microphone slightly. "Jacob is not at fault." I looked directly at her. "And because he is not at fault, I will not allow you to use him as a shield any longer." At that moment, Helen, Michael's younger sister, stood up from the table near the stage. She walked over and extended her hands toward Jacob. "Give him to me," she said. "At least tonight, stop using him." Evelyn released Jacob slowly, as though being peeled away from the last fragment of her power. Helen took the boy into her arms, turned her back on Evelyn. That was the moment their side began to crack from within. Michael looked at Helen. "You believe her?" Helen answered immediately, "I believe the screen behind you." Those words fell into the room, clean, precise, needing nothing more. Michael's face cycled through colors, first red with anger, then white with fear, then gray, like a man who has just realized there is no way out. His shoulders sagged, his jaw twitched slightly, and in fewer than 10 seconds, the man who had believed he owned everything shrank until he was almost pitiable. Evelyn kept searching the room for a face still willing to offer her sympathy. She looked around, but every pair of eyes turned away. Then her hand reached up to touch my father's pearl necklace, as though she could borrow the dignity of a dead man to shield herself. I stepped toward her. "Don't touch it as though you're still worthy of it." Evelyn's hand dropped from the pearls. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother have nothing left to say. Margaret looked at Michael, her voice quiet but cutting deep. "If your father were still alive, he would not recognize you." That single sentence broke Michael faster than any piece of evidence. Not because it was loud, but because it stripped away the last thing he had believed he still possessed, his mother's loyalty. Patricia took the microphone from me. "Tonight, we are not asking anyone here to render a verdict in place of a court," she said. "But these documents have been forwarded to civil attorneys, a forensic accountant's report has been filed, and a motion to preserve marital assets has been submitted." Michael stared at Patricia the way a man stares at a steel door closing in front of him. Evelyn stepped back half a step and bumped into the base of the podium. The glass of water beside her tipped sideways, spilling across the wooden surface, while the screen behind them still held 99.9997%. I said nothing more. I stepped down from the stage, walked past Michael, past Evelyn, past every face that had just witnessed a truth impossible to swallow. My father's brown leather shoes struck slow, deliberate steps on the polished stone floor. As I reached the door, Margaret called my name. "Claire." I turned around. She stood in the middle of the room, looking far older than she had at the beginning of the evening, then bowed her head and said, "I'm sorry for raising a man who believed women were something to be used and discarded." I didn't know whether to forgive her. I only nodded once, because that night I hadn't come to be apologized to. I had come so the truth would no longer be buried alive alongside me. But the truth on that screen was only the first night. The next morning, the first account was frozen at 9:06. Patricia called me at 9:18, her voice as steady as ever. "Don't answer Michael. Don't answer Evelyn. From now on, everything goes through the attorneys." I was sitting in my car outside a small coffee shop in Denver, hands on the steering wheel, my father's brown shoes resting lightly on the floor mat. The phone vibrated 31 times in 12 minutes, 18 calls from Michael, 9 from my mother, 4 from unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Not because I was strong, but because if I heard their voices one more time, I was afraid the last remaining human part of me would soften and betray itself. By 11:40 that morning, Daniel had sent an updated report. The total in hidden assets was no longer $196,200. After tracing 3 additional sub-accounts and 2 fraudulent invoices, the running figure had climbed to $243,750. At 12:22, Michael texted, "Claire, I know I was wrong, but please don't destroy my life. We used to love each other." I stared at those words for a long time, then forwarded them directly to Patricia. She replied in exactly 2 minutes. "Good, admission tone, save it." I laughed for the first time in days. Not from happiness, but from pain so acute that laughter came out sounding like cracking glass. By 3:05 that afternoon, the Children's Education Fund had removed Evelyn's name from their website. By 4:26, Michael's firm announced he was taking a temporary leave to address personal matters. By 6:10 that evening, Helen texted me that Jacob was at her place, eating macaroni and cheese, watching cartoons, and no longer crying. That message made me sit down on the kitchen floor. I had thought I would feel vindicated when everything collapsed, but knowing Jacob was all right, I only felt a very old sadness move through my chest. 3 weeks later, Michael was ordered to surrender all financial records. Daniel found an additional $31,600 in an investment account held under a shell company. Patricia said plainly, "He didn't hide money like a panicked man. He hid money like someone who had been practicing." My mother sent me an email of 1,842 words. She said she was lonely. She was weak. She had been made by Michael to believe that love has no age. But in the entire email, not a single line read, "I destroyed you." I read it once. Then I saved it to the Blue Shoes folder. Not because I still wanted it as evidence, but because I needed to remind myself that some apologies are only another way of asking for a reduced sentence. Michael lost his position after 2 months. Carter Family Holdings came under investigation for fraudulent transactions and concealment of marital assets. He wasn't imprisoned immediately, but he faced civil suits, financial penalties, and a restitution amount large enough to drain the color from his face at the mediation hearing. Evelyn sold the Portland house. No more fundraising dinners, no more speeches about courage, no more photographs of her cradling Jacob like a badge of moral virtue. The woman who had built her entire existence on image was, in the end, consumed by that very image. Jacob was cared for by Helen for a time, then his circumstances moved through a separate legal process to protect his interests. I don't hate Jacob. I couldn't. He is an innocent child placed at the center of a trap that adults had set before he knew how to speak his first word. People have asked me whether I feel like I won. I usually don't answer right away, because winning, if it exists, doesn't look the way people imagine. It has no musical score. There is no scene of me walking forward in brilliant light, hair flowing, lips curved into a smile. It looks like a quiet kitchen at 7:12 in the morning, when you make your own coffee, watch sunlight fall across the tabletop, and realize there is no one left in the house who can lie to you. 6 months later, I moved to a small house on the outskirts of Denver. Not large, not grand, no living room spacious enough for hollow dinner parties. But in the mornings, the light comes through the windows very gently, and in the backyard, there is a young maple tree just turning its leaves. I placed the ring box in the bottom drawer. I didn't throw it away, and I didn't keep it as a memory. I kept it as a receipt, proof that a version of me paid a very steep price so that the version of me living now could exist. I won the case. I recovered the hidden assets. I recovered the right to speak the truth. But I did not recover the mother I had once believed I had. And perhaps that is the real cost. Not losing a husband, not losing money, but losing the childlike faith that people who share your blood always know how to love you right. This morning, at 7:28, I sat on the back porch with a cup of black coffee. Sunlight slid through the wooden fence and landed on the toes of my father's old brown leather shoes. The leather has cracked a little more. The laces are fraying, but they are still there, beneath my feet. I am no longer the woman who walked into that room hoping to be loved the right way. I am no longer the daughter waiting for her mother to come back and be a mother. I am only Claire, someone who has learned that sometimes family is not where you are born, but where you no longer have to prove that your pain is real. I bent down and retied my father's brown leather shoes. Then I stood up. I once believed the greatest betrayal was when someone you love turns their back on you. But after everything, I understand there is a deeper pain. When the person who brought you into the world becomes the person who teaches you how to protect yourself from them. Michael once said I had nothing. My mother once said I couldn't hold on to a marriage. They both forgot that there are women who don't need to raise their voices to become dangerous. They only need to stay silent long enough for the truth to grow its own teeth. I'm not telling this story to say I won. I'm telling it because somewhere out there may be someone sitting in the dark, asking themselves whether they are going crazy for feeling that everything around them is wrong. You're not. Sometimes you're not losing your mind. Sometimes your body recognizes the truth before your heart has the courage to accept it. I lost a husband. I lost a mother. I lost the naive version of myself who once believed that blood never deliberately causes pain. But I kept myself, and on that morning, when sunlight fell across my father's old brown shoes, I understood that peace is not the absence of wounds. Peace is when no one is permitted to use those wounds to control you anymore.